In the standard global manufacturing model, a corporate headquarters procures raw materials and ships them across borders to a toll manufacturer in another region. That overseas facility acts as a subcontractor. They receive the components, apply local labor and machinery, and assemble the materials into finished goods. Once complete, those finished products are exported directly from the subcontractor's loading dock to the global market. Because this physical supply chain is so common, IT teams assume this physical movement maps perfectly onto standard subcontracting modules in SAP S/4HANA. Architects use item category L for subcontracting POs, classify inventory as special stock O, and use movements 541 and 543. Headquarters tracks every component as self-owned assets. However, before go-live, this setup triggers catastrophic legal and financial failures against international trade law realities. These projects rarely stall because the IT team lacks technical knowledge of tax codes or trade regulations. The individual rules are usually well understood. The failure is a result of a sequencing error. Configuring an ERP before aligning the contractual definition with the economic reality on the ground turns standard S/4HANA settings into legal landmines. To prevent these collisions, we must examine how a global supply chain operates across three distinct layers. The contractual reality is the legal agreement defining who owns the assets at any given moment, who absorbs the risk of loss, and the precise nature of the services being purchased. The physical reality is the literal truth of the operation, what is actually happening on the factory floor, and what physical boxes are crossing national borders. The system reality is the digital ledger in S/4HANA that records these actions, calculates costs, and reports profits. S/4HANA does not create reality. It only mirrors the assumptions fed into it during the design phase. If the legal contract misaligns with the physical truth on the ground, the ERP will flawlessly execute a lie, generating perfectly formatted but legally invalid data that fails audits. The first major failure point is the gap between the written contract and the factory floor reality. Often, a headquarters will draft a contract designating an overseas facility as a simple toll processor, essentially a provider of manual labor for materials owned by the parent company. But on the ground, that subcontractor is actually executing complex production planning and independent procurement. S/4HANA interprets this as standard tolling, treating all inventory as headquarters assets, even though the factory manages complex supply inputs. Consequently, the ERP allocates zero manufacturing profit to the subsidiary, recording all value creation back at headquarters. Tax authorities prioritize economic substance over contract text. When they see a facility managing its own production and supply chain, they classify it as a true manufacturer. Tax law requires profit to be allocated where value-generating functions actually occur. If the facility functions as a manufacturer, it must be taxed as one. SAP cannot fix a legally invalid premise. No amount of system reconfiguration can save a transfer pricing audit if the economic substance contradicts the underlying contract. This leads to the second failure, using free-of-charge provision because it is the easiest path to configure in S/4HANA. The problem arises when physical goods must cross a sovereign national border. Border authorities assess physical value for duties regardless of internal accounting. They block zero-value shipments, applying their own valuation. In jurisdictions like China, processing trade requires strict valuation matching. The free label creates an immediate compliance mismatch. To bypass the customs hold, project teams often switch to paid provision, where the headquarters actually sells the materials to the subcontractor. This change solves the customs issue, but breaks the system reality. Paid provision triggers intercompany margins and complex internal revenue rules. Standard subcontracting movement types, like 541 and 543, are completely incapable of handling these new intercompany margins. The out-of-the-box configuration collapses. Material provision strategy must be designed around where value is generated and who holds the tax liability, not what is easiest to build in the system. The third failure point is the belief that trade and environmental compliance can simply be added as a check at the end of the design process. Consider the act of emailing technical CAD drawings to the overseas plant so they can begin production. Under international law, sharing that technical data is a regulated export. It occurs entirely outside the ERP's purview, but carries the same legal weight as shipping a physical crate of restricted technology. Similarly, chemical regulations like REACH and RoHS require precise material data that must be integrated into the supply chain. Chemical compliance depends on an unbroken chain of component data stretching deep into the supply base. If a Tier 2 supplier fails to provide chemical metadata, the data flow stops. The upper nodes of the bill of materials remain blank. Without upstream data, the S/4HANA EHS module is empty. The system cannot generate the necessary compliance certifications. An ERP only transmits compliance, it does not generate it. If the physical data chain breaks, the product cannot be sold, rendering the system irrelevant. To prevent global go-live failures, the project must ensure the business model and tax regulations are perfectly aligned before a single line of SAP configuration is written. This tripartite architecture sequences the work. Business process and legal regulatory gears must lock together first. This foundational step explicitly defines where value is created and identifies who holds the physical and financial risk across the entire supply chain. These definitions serve as the blueprints for the final gear, the S/4HANA design. Only after this legal and economic reality is codified can you apply specific architectural templates to mirror that reality in the system. Mapping this aligned reality requires advanced design templates that go beyond standard out-of-the-box settings. For paid provision, architects map the buy-sell relationship using SD/MM intercompany logic, bypassing the standard subcontracting node entirely. Overseas tooling is managed by defining mold ownership in asset accounting and tracking physical location through plant maintenance equipment serialization. This dual-module approach ensures that physical location data is available to satisfy tax audits regarding asset presence in foreign jurisdictions. The costing template utilizes the material ledger and actual costing to manage multi-currency valuations and accurately eliminate internal profits. Integration with global trade services ensures that HS codes and export licenses are automated directly at the point of border crossing. A successful global manufacturing architecture treats the ERP as the final layer in a hierarchy that begins with tax strategy, supply chain physics, and trade compliance. The system only succeeds when it accurately reflects those pre-aligned realities.